That's right. We speak among ourselves about people like you that's playing in our team. Tony Adams, I'm playing for Oxford. And I used to hate them bastards.
You knock on the door. And it's fucking Billy. And I'm telling you now, this is fucking true, I'm fucking sorry.
He was nuts. That is what they called him. But this was not just some nickname thrown around the dressing room. Even the toughest legends in football, players who built their careers on violence and fear, did everything they could to avoid Billy Whitehurst. This was a man who made hard men shake. A man who turned professional football into something darker. A fight for survival. English football in the 1980s and early 1990s was brutal. Referees let players get away with murder on the pitch. Tackling was vicious. Elbows flew. Blood was common. It was an era where being tough was not just an advantage, it was a requirement. Dozens of players earned reputations as enforcers, as hard blokes you did not want to cross. Every team had at least one player whose job was to intimidate, to hurt, to make the opposition think twice before taking the ball. The game was policed by the players themselves, not the officials. If you wanted to survive, you had to be willing to fight back. It was football, but it was also war. But even in that violent landscape, one name stood above all others. Billy Whitehurst. Whitehurst was a striker who played for over 10 different clubs during his career. He bounced around from Hull City to Newcastle United to Sheffield United and beyond. He never settled anywhere for long, but wherever he went, chaos followed. His aggressive style and intimidating presence attracted attention everywhere. He was known across the game by players and fans alike as the hardest man to ever play football. That is not just folklore, that is the consensus of the people who actually had to face him. What made Whitehurst different from every other tough player of his era was simple. His violence was real. Most hard men in football played a role. They acted tough on the pitch, threw their weight around, and used intimidation as a tactic. But when the final whistle blew, it was over. They went home. Whitehurst was different. The violence did not stop when the match ended. His aggression was not an act. It was who he was, and everyone knew it. That knowledge created a unique kind of terror. When you faced Billy Whitehurst, you were not just preparing for a tough match, you were preparing for genuine danger. Opposing players knew they were in for a full-blooded display, and if you tried to challenge his authority on the pitch, there was only one outcome. You would get hurt. Defenders would lie awake the night before, facing him. They would talk to teammates who had played against him before, trying to get advice, trying to find a way to handle him, but there was no strategy. There was no tactical solution. You just had to hope you survived the 90 minutes without getting seriously injured or humiliated. Some defenders admitted they played differently against Whitehurst. They backed off. They gave him space. Not because it was good defending, but because getting close to him felt like stepping into a cage with a wild animal. The mental preparation required to face him was exhausting. By the time the match started, some players were already beaten. The fear Whitehurst generated was validated by the very players who were supposed to be fearless. Vinnie Jones, the leader of Wimbledon's notorious Crazy Gang, was the definition of a hard man. Jones built his entire career on intimidation. He was famous for his crunching tackles and wild behaviour, but even Vinnie Jones admitted that Billy Whitehurst was the toughest player in football. That statement alone puts Whitehurst at the top of the hierarchy. But Jones did more than just talk. He learned firsthand what it meant to cross Whitehurst. The two were teammates at Sheffield United, and according to reports, Whitehurst physically beat up Jones. Not on the pitch, off it. This was not a football rivalry. This was real violence between two men, and Whitehurst dominated. That sent a message to everyone in the game. It did not matter how tough you were. It did not matter what your reputation was. If you challenged Billy Whitehurst, you would lose. One story perfectly captures the madness of Whitehurst's approach to life. Vinnie Jones had just arrived somewhere in a brand new BMW 7 Series. Expensive, pristine, the kind of car you show off. Whitehurst drove his old banger straight into the side of it, just rammed it. When Jones came out, out and asked who had done it, Whitehurst stepped forward and said, "May, what are you going to do about it?" 7 words. That was all it took. Jones, the man who scared everyone else, backed down because he knew Whitehurst was not bluffing. He was willing to escalate to any level, at any time, for any reason. Then there is Neil Ruddock. Razor Ruddock was a defender known for his uncompromising style. He played for Southampton and Liverpool, clubs where toughness was expected. Ruddock was not someone who scared easily, but when he faced Billy Whitehurst, something changed. Ruddock admitted that when Whitehurst would whisper threats to him during matches, he used to start shaking. Actually shaking. That is not fear of losing a tackle. That is fear of genuine harm. Ruddock also recalled one of the most bizarre incidents in football history. During a match where Whitehurst was not even playing, Ruddock was doing well against a rival striker. At halftime, Whitehurst, dressed in a full suit and tie, ran onto the pitch, grabbed Ruddock's Southampton shirt and ripped it apart. Ruddock had to play the entire second half with his shirt torn and unbuttoned. Why did Whitehurst do it? To remind Ruddock who was in charge, to show him that even when Whitehurst was not on the pitch, he could still ruin your day. Ruddock said that Whitehurst used to scare the life out of him. If you won a header against Billy Whitehurst, he would want to tear your head off just for beating him in the air. Winning a challenge against him was seen as a provocation. You were not rewarded for doing well. You were punished. What separates Whitehurst from Jones and Ruddock is authenticity. Jones and Ruddock were hard men within the rules of football. They knew how to intimidate, how to hurt people within the boundaries of the game. Whitehurst did not recognise those boundaries. His reputation for street fighting and physical confrontation was real. He was not playing a character. He was genuinely dangerous. That is why the hard men feared him. They recognised that his violence was uncontained and uncontrollable. Alan Hansen, the former Liverpool and Scotland defender, also weighed in. Hansen was not a hard man. He was a graceful, technically gifted player who won trophies with Liverpool and became a respected pundit. He was not someone who sought out physical battles. But Hansen said that Billy Whitehurst was the hardest man he ever played against. That statement is significant. It means Whitehurst's menace was not just effective against tough players. It worked against everyone. Even the most composed professional athletes were unsettled by him. Carlton Palmer, a midfielder who played for England and Sheffield Wednesday, remembered the dread of facing Whitehurst. Palmer named 3 players that defenders absolutely did not want to play against: John Fashanu, Mick Harford and Billy Whitehurst. He called them the unwanted trinity. Fashanu was part of Wimbledon's crazy gang. Harford was a beast in the air, but Whitehurst was the worst of the 3. Facing him required mental and physical preparation days in advance, and even then, you were not ready. So what was Whitehurst actually like on the pitch? He was 6 feet tall, stocky, aggressive and relentless. His playing style was not refined. He was not a technical genius. He did not score beautiful goals. What he did was use extreme physical intimidation as an offensive weapon. He disrupted defensive lines purely through the threat of bodily harm. Defenders knew that if they got too close, something bad would happen. Despite all the fear he generated, Whitehurst never had a stable career at the top level. He was Hull City's most popular player for a time. In 1985, Newcastle United signed him as their record signing. That should have been the start of something big. Newcastle had talented players like Peter Beardsley and Paul Gascoigne, but Whitehurst's time there was a disaster. He could not settle. His volatility and aggression overshadowed whatever technical ability he had. The club expected goals and consistency. What they got was chaos. Whitehurst did not fit the system. He did not adapt to the tactics. He played his own game, which was based on fear and violence, not teamwork and strategy. After Newcastle, he cycled through 6 more Football League clubs. He was a journeyman, a wanderer, always moving, never staying. Each club hoped they could harness his intensity. Each club failed. His reputation preceded him everywhere he went, and while it brought attention, it also brought problems. Managers did not know how to handle him. Teammates did not know whether to respect him or avoid him. This instability reveals a harsh truth. Whitehurst's intimidation came at a cost. Yes, he was feared. Yes, he dominated psychologically, but that same intensity limited his professional scope. The unpredictability that made him terrifying also made him a liability. Clubs could not rely on him. Managers could not control him. His hard-man persona and off-field antics ensured he always caused a reaction, but that reaction was not always positive. He achieved supreme intimidation, but at the expense of consistent career progression at the highest levels. What truly set Whitehurst apart was his life outside football. This is where the terror became real. Most players kept their professional and personal lives separate. Whitehurst did not. Multiple accounts confirm that he engaged in illegal bare-knuckle fights for money. He was involved in numerous barroom brawls. This was not rumour. This was fact. He was a dangerous footballer who struck fear into his opposition because they knew he was actually dangerous. During his time at Oxford United from 1986 to 1988, it was rumoured that Whitehurst supplemented his football earnings by fighting local travellers in bare-knuckle bouts. This information, whether fully verified or not, provided terrifying credibility. Opponents knew that confronting Whitehurst on the pitch risked provoking a man who willingly participated in life-threatening combat on the side. He had no concern for the physical repercussions of violence. That is impossible to counter with standard sporting aggression. The physical toll Whitehurst endured underscored his authenticity. His rugged character was rooted in his beginnings as a bricklayer before turning professional. That working-class foundation gave him genuine toughness, but his injuries spoke louder than his background. Whitehurst was involved in a brawl where he suffered a smashed nose, 30 stitches to the back of his head, and a blow that drove a metal bar through his cheek. The bar created a hole in his face close to his nose. People could see into his mouth through his cheek. And what did Whitehurst do after that? He came back to play, quickly. Sometimes he would play in the second half of a match with staples holding his head wounds together instead of stitches. He would run onto the pitch with a visible hole in his cheek. Opponents could see the damage. They could see that this man did not care about pain. He did not care about his own safety. That created a perception of invulnerability. This resilience validated the professional threat. Whitehurst did not adhere to normal boundaries of self-preservation. The knowledge of his off-field violence, combined with his willingness to return to the pitch physically mangled, created a unique level of terror. He introduced genuine danger into what was supposed to be a sporting contest. Players were not just trying to beat a forward, they were trying to avoid a confrontation with a man whose life revolved around being unapologetically violent. Whitehurst saw football as just one outlet for conflict. It was not special to him. It was not sacred. It was just another place to fight. That mindset is what made him so effective. Other hard men treated football as a job, a career, something to protect. Whitehurst treated it as a battleground, and if you stepped onto that battleground, you were fair game. The era Whitehurst played in allowed him to flourish. Referees afforded players very little protection. You could get away with brutal tackles, elbows, and off-the-ball incidents that would result in red cards today. Whitehurst exploited that environment to its fullest. But even in that brutal era, he stood out. He was not just tough, he was uncontrollable. That lack of control was both his greatest weapon and his biggest weakness. It made him terrifying. It made opponents question whether he would finish the match or try to kill someone. But it also made him unreliable. Clubs could not build around him. Teams could not depend on him. His aggression was too unpredictable, too volatile. It cost him the chance at sustained success. Billy Whitehurst's legacy is not one of trophies or records. It is not one of technical brilliance or tactical innovation. His legacy is fear, pure, unfiltered fear. He remains the undisputed reference point for uncontained violence and intimidation in the 1980s and 1990s. He is remembered not for what he achieved, but for what he made people feel. The true measure of his terror is that he dominated the very people who specialised in intimidation. Vinnie Jones, Neil Ruddock, Alan Hansen, Carlton Palmer. These were not soft players. These were hard, experienced professionals who had seen it all, and they were afraid of Billy Whitehurst. Not respectful, not cautious, afraid. Whitehurst blurred the line between football and real-world combat. He brought the streets onto the pitch. His alleged bare-knuckle fighting, his visible battle scars, his willingness to escalate any situation to violence, all of it combined to create a persona that transcended sport. When you faced Billy Whitehurst, you were not playing a game. You were in a fight for survival. And if you challenged his authority, you knew there would be consequences. That is why his career, despite all the clubs and all the moves, is defined by fear. He was a journeyman who never found a permanent home. He was a striker who never scored enough goals to justify his reputation. He was a hard man whose aggression limited his professional growth. But he was also the only player in football history who made the hardest men in the game genuinely scared. Billy Whitehurst was not just a hard man, he was the reason hard men became afraid. And that, more than anything, is his legacy.